Well, hello everybody. I think Andrew has started it. I'm on. Great. Well, I suppose that means I should do something. And Andrew, the slides are showing. Perfect. There we go. All right. Now I just have to make sure that my coworkers don't interrupt my presentation. Kidding. What are you doing? All right. Yeah. So I tried to do it over Wi-Fi, but it wasn't going to work that way. So, yeah. So we are live now. So welcome everybody. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes here. We're going to just do a quick introduction, and then we'll advance slides as people come on, and I'll kind of check with Andrew here. I think he can probably see our count for how many people have logged in, whereas I cannot. All right, he says we're good to go. All right. So I am Cameron Johnson. I am presenting here from the world headquarters of Stout Tanks and Kettles. We just moved to a bigger location. The move was only about, what was it, Don, like 2,000 feet or something?
Yeah, it's in the same complex.
Yeah, in the same business park in Southern Oregon, in Tigard, Oregon. But much bigger facility now, a lot more space. So previously, thank you, Sam, for the heads up. Previously, I've worked with other brewery equipment manufacturers. I started my own brewery and incubator co-op brewery space in 2015, 2016 in Spokane. That is still running, but I am now a background role there. My brewery, Young Buck Brewing, was one of the first there, and now we host 3 other breweries with the intent that you're there for a few years, building up your brands, your experience, your local accounts, and then you move out to your own space and somebody else fills your spot in the incubator. So we'll talk about that model, we'll talk about other concepts, but what I want to start with is a little intro to the overall structure here. We're going to be talking about some quick beer stats in the US, what numbers are looking like over the past 3 years and what that means for us, why we should consider alternative models for brewing, looking at 3 versions of those alternative models, although there are, of course, more. But these are the 3 that are the most proven and the most prevalent, so they're good to examine. The 4th part, right sizing your brewery and balancing production expectations versus revenue generation. And then part 5, my favorite part from a good friend of mine, Dr. Sam Hollowey, and he will probably make fun of me for calling him doctor, but he is a genius and he holds a PhD, so I'm going to use it. He owns and runs Crafting a Strategy, a beer advice portal online where various professionals from interrelated industries talk about how to run your brewery better, how to strategically implement plans in the craft brew world. So the first slide we'll look at here, U.S. craft beer, just a brief history. In 1873, the Reconstruction era, this was following the American Civil War, the U.S. had about 4,100 breweries and approximately 39 million people. That's one brewery for every 10,000 people. And now, in the wonder years, so to speak, we have 8,400 breweries and approximately 328 million people. So in the past 150 years, our population has increased 8.5 times, but our breweries only 2 times. So we're not really going to get into why or wherefore on that, but it's just an important statistic to keep in mind, that that's where we've been, that's where we are now, and it helps inform us as to what the future may look like. So these next few slides are pulled directly from the Brewers Association website. They are a great resource for statistical information on craft breweries, in addition to technical brewing information and linking with other craft brewers in your area and sharing resources. I highly recommend joining the Brewers Association if you have not joined already. So we see in 2017, we had about 12.5% volume in the beer world, relegated to craft beer that we had earned from the hard-fought battles of the past several decades. 2019, we jumped up to 13.6. The 2020 numbers obviously aren't out yet. I suspect that is likely going to be about the same, maybe a bit higher, because we're talking about volume share in total beer sold. Now, while we sold less pints, we're selling more packages. So that's another change that we'll talk about. The other big figure I want to talk about is this 2019 craft retail dollar value growth. So we've had a 6% growth in that dollar value over 2018 to 2019. So the craft beer dollar share in terms of beer sold is 25%. That's significant, especially given that we're only half that in terms of volume sold. We command higher retail price. People are obviously willing to pay that price, and we need to internalize that value for our own product and make sure that we are focusing on that value of our craft. So the next slide here, the numbers I want to focus on are these two. This is production volume growth, or production volume in 2019. So these relatively small areas are doing the majority of the growth because there is room to grow. This is something that Sam Hollowey talks about in terms of fragmentation and where these various small pieces are that you can take an opportunity to move into and grow in. Only 1.2% of overall craft beer is in contract brewing, but it is still a completely viable model. And only about 12% of total craft beer industry is between brew pubs and tap room. There's still a lot of that volume in the regional breweries and the regional microbreweries, but these opportunities to capitalize on these smaller markets are highlighted there. So overall beer was down 1.5%. Craft beer was up 3.5%. So while we are contracting a bit in the market, we are still winning in terms of overall growth. So why are we interested in alternative models? We'll look at three things: scale, craft, and niche. So scale, the scale of the craft brewing industry is changing rapidly and has gotten a lot bigger through mergers in the past several years. We want to choose our scale that we start at intelligently and intentionally and realistically. So the mantra I like to use is don't try to be all things to all people, and don't try to be a regionally focused distribution brewery. Don't try to compete at that scale or to that demographic unless you're really willing to invest a lot of capital upfront and play the long game of competing in these low margin, high volume sales. It's a really tough game to play. If you want to, you can be in that space, but you're looking at probably hundreds of millions invested rather than a small scale neighborhood brew pub is you could do easily for probably 300, 400,000. So what I advise is looking at similar scale retail models. So bakeries, coffee shops, neighborhood cafes. These are all small scale retail that have been successful over the past several decades. One, because they operate very low capital intensive, very low overhead, and two, because they have an incredibly loyal local following. They focus on their immediate audience, and they garner all those followers as quickly as possible, get those loyal patrons in to fill up the seats consistently so that you have consistent, predictable revenue, and then slowly expand out from there if you need to. There's a quote that goes around through the beer industry I've forgotten who says it at this point, but it's I'd rather sell less beer for more money than the other way around. And that's how I feel pretty securely. Some people like the challenge of growing a craft brewery to a regional brewery and getting acquired, and that is certainly one path that you can take, but it is a much longer road and a much more expensive road to travel. So the second portion here, craft. Beer was a craft in the United States, just like cider and wine were. Then it became a commodity in the industrial era. Anheuser-Busch was a big driving force behind that. Now we are moving back to where the general beer drinking populace is starting to see beer as a craft again. And that really started in, I guess you could say, with Anchor Steam and then Sierra Nevada. But in terms of the general populace seeing beer as a craft, wasn't really set in the public mindset until about a decade ago or so. So if we look at historical consumerism trends, consumers buy basic goods, commodities, from wherever they're cheapest. But this trend is changing. We're starting to see people focus more on quality rather than quantity I can get with my dollar. There's always going to be the commodity market, but that's not where craft beer should focus, in my opinion. That being said, craft beer does exist in a kind of gray area between commodity and craft. We are fighting the historical basis of beer and trying to push it more towards the level that wine in the US has risen to. A decade ago, you couldn't sell a 750 milliliter bottle for over $10 consistently. Now you can. Breweries do it all the time. They may not be able to do it in the same volume as large-scale wineries do, but we can do it. And if we control our costs and our operational overhead and our volume, you can make that game work. So my focus here, or my challenge to small-scale craft breweries, was to encourage your consumer base to focus on the value of craft. Don't try to be all things to all people. Don't be a commodity. You make a special product, you are a special place and a special brand, and that is worth money. So that uniquely crafted value of your product is what's your main edge here. And then niche, this feeds into that craft discussion. So the graphic here is from Kodo Design. They are a design and branding company, I believe, out of Illinois, but I may have that wrong. Forgive me, Kodo guys, if you are listening, guys and gals. Kodo is a wonderful organization, and they make a product available completely for free for all craft brewers and interested parties called the Craft Beer Branding Guide. I highly recommend you go to Kodo's website and download that PDF. It is invaluable. So what they talk about is focusing on your brand's unique value and finding a place for that. They use phrases like what makes you authentic and peculiar and strange and individual. Again, not trying to be all things to all people. We can't serve every market, and it's a losing game to try. You need to find your opportunity niche and stick to that. So what this graphic shows is their way of finding opportunities. So you have two axes. You have the x-axis and the y-axis. On the x-axis, you have two extremes. And on the y-axis, you have another two extremes. So in this example, on our x, we have a hyper-local tap house, one that maybe has 20 seats and is serving a very distinct neighborhood. The best example I can think of that's doing it incredibly successfully and just won another GABF gold medal is Perry Street Brewing out of Spokane. Ben Lukes there is an incredible guy and is always willing to advise people who talk to him. So we have that hyper-local brew house and then the regional tap house, regional brew pub. Those are your two extremes on the x-axis. And then the y, you have, you can do anything comparing these. But in this example, we have a classic style focused brewery versus new school styles. So then what you do is you look at your local market or wherever you plan to be serving and plot out all the breweries in the area that are successful and where they fall on this graph. And then look at the data and find out where there are gaps. Right here in this mock example, we find that there's a big area, a big empty white area between a hyper-local tap house that focuses on new school styles. So that is a potential opportunity niche. So this kind of analysis is very important for planning your brewery or refocusing your brewery as we're all kind of pivoting and transitioning in this COVID era. Look for the opportunities and use data to drive those decisions. So now we'll look at alternating models. So there are three we're going to discuss today: alternating proprietorship, Gypsy Brewing, and the regional brew pub model. So the alternating proprietorship, this was a license type originally created as a way for operating breweries to lease off part of the time on their brew house or in their production space, on their tanks, on their canning and bottling lines to other entities. So as many of you know, there are large periods of time in a brewery where there are equipment downtimes. So like keg washers are often not being used. Canning and bottling lines are often not being used at the scale we're focusing on. On a large scale brewery, probably not. Sometimes even tanks are sitting empty for a bit, or the brew house isn't being used. So the alternating proprietorship was a way for smaller breweries and larger breweries to lease out some of that time in a licensed premises to another brewery that is also established, also has their own license, but does not have their own premises or does not have that scale of equipment or access to the capital for that kind of equipment. So the lessor gains an additional revenue stream through leasing this out, and the lessee benefits from being able to use large-scale production platform without all that capital investment up front or the overhead of maintaining it over time. So what I started in Spokane, we started planning it in 2014 and opened in 2016, was the incubator brewery. So this was modeled after the tech startups in Silicon Valley, a little bit modeled after Flying Bike Cooperative, a little bit modeled after the La Brewery in Bellingham. I believe I'm remembering that name right. So what we wanted to do was make use of this alternating proprietorship model where we have one host tenant, that's Young Buck Brewing, that was my brewery, where we have a 7-barrel system and fermenters and bright tanks, and then a separately licensed front of house tap room where we can sell our product. So we had enough space in there to host 3 different breweries at a time, and then we share time on the 7-barrel brew house, and each brewer gets some fermenter space and bright tank space and access to the keg washer, and your monthly rent is incredibly low. We all share the cost of things like CO2 and electricity, natural gas, water, and it's a cooperative way, a very low capital intensive cooperative way to test the waters of professional brewing, develop your skills, develop your branding and your business and your marketing before you move out to your own space, take on a lease on your own, start taking on debt. So we wanted to help grow the craft beer scene of the Inland Northwest, and this was the easiest concept and the easiest conceptualized way to do so. Limitations of this are obviously that retail sales are tough because you don't have your own licensed retail operation. You are not going to make the retail margins. That being said, that is kind of offset by the fact that you don't have those high capital costs. One moment, I'm going to stop that noise. Okay. Gypsy Brewing. So this was an evolution of the alternating proprietorship model, and we started seeing it being used in kind of the early to late 2000s mostly. So some common examples here are, and ones that have now turned to their own commercial success, is Grimm Artisanal Ales in Brooklyn, Triple Voodoo Brewing in San Francisco, and then Evil Twin and McKellar out of Denmark. So in this model, the leasing party, the licensed operating brewery, doesn't have their own premises for operations. They're not alternating with an established brewery. They are meandering around to wherever there is space and setting up individualized alternating proprietorship models. It's a great amount of flexibility in terms of scale, schedule what beers you can produce. But again, you're limited by not having a direct retail outlet for your product. Now, in this respect, COVID has kind of changed things for the better. Consumers are now looking at online retail platforms for moving their beer, and it's being accepted by the marketplace pretty readily. I mean, we are already a society that has taken on the Amazon mindset of being able to order anything you want online and have it shipped there quickly. And if you can capitalize on that mindset as a local small-scale brewery, you can move more product. You're not going to get the same margins as you would in your tap room, and you're probably not going to have the same volume, but your costs are lower because you're not paying to heat and condition a tap room space or pay staff to man it. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. Then next is the neighborhood brew pub model. Now this is the one that is kind of struggling the most in COVID because it relied so intensely on people coming in and buying beer and buying food. So this is a neighborhood focused brewery with a restaurant component. May not be a full scale restaurant, but has a good amount of food that both attracts people and keeps them there buying another pint and eating. And it's a high margin per volume sale. You're getting that over the counter price. So typically this is used in 3 to 7 barrel operations, maybe even some 15s and some 20s, but I would argue at that scale, you're probably not fully utilizing that scale brew house. And these are anywhere from 300 to 800 barrels a year, maybe up to 1,000. But once you start pushing past that 800, you either have a really big tasting room, a really popular tasting room and restaurant, or you're having to push product out to a distributor, which is fine. But it's a lower margin sale, and you could make less beer and sell it all in-house and end up with about the same amount of money. So I just want to emphasize that a small brewery can easily be profitable. You can do this selling 500 barrels a year. You can do this selling it even a little bit less than that if you're careful and if you have some unique circumstances. But if even half of those sales are done in your own tap room, where you control the margins, you control the conversation and the interaction, you can make that work. So like I said before, with the emulating the neighborhood coffee shop model, that's the most apropos example that I always think of when I'm talking to people about this, because this small brew pub relies on that local interaction and the locale. Locals and locale are what you need to focus on. You need a location that people are willing to walk to and stay in and be comfortable, and you need that local audience that loves you and is willing to be with you because they value the craft that you are putting together. So this tap room is not only a high margin revenue generator, but it is your brand's public face. It is how you share your story with your customers and how you establish and maintain and cultivate relationships. And selling beer in a small scale like this is all about relationships. So the environment you create in that space needs to be comfortable, needs to be memorable, a place that people want to come back to and bring their friends to, and it needs to reflect what your brand is about. You need to have a consistent message about your brand, its values, its focus, its quirkiness. You need to really embrace that and be honest about it. And again, my constant refrain is don't try to be all things to all people. That's a big hole that you can fall down real fast. Be honest about what your brand is. So part 4, now we'll get into brewery sizing. Right sizing your brewery really starts with financials at this scale. Not only what amount of debt are you comfortable starting with and what collateral you're going to put up against that if you have to, but what do you want to make each year? You can very easily start with a set salary that you want to make and then work backwards from there in terms of cost of goods sold, production volume, revenue projections, and where that money is going to go. And you need to make sure that you allot money for yourself. You need to count your own time in some way, because you are not going to be able to pay yourself for every hour you invest in your business, but you need to make sure that you are counting it and that you are working on a plan to pay yourself, even if it's not immediately. So don't fear the spreadsheet, right? It's kind of a twist on the homebrewing mantra of don't fear the foam. Excel is your best friend. Excel makes complex calculations and formula-driven decision-making very easy. Once you build out a spreadsheet where you can put in your production volume, you can very easily alter things as you're going along and look back at your business plan, see where you thought you were going to be, where you wanted to be moving, and make those adjustments in Excel and see where you need to go to get there. And I have many, many spreadsheets I've built for this that I am happy to share after the presentation. One that I shared earlier this year was a keg float spreadsheet for estimating how many kegs you're going to need for your brewery based on production volume. And all these spreadsheets that I put together are fully interactive and formula driven, so that there are variable cells that you can change and then output cells that tell you the data you want. So the other thing is on equipment, you don't really need that dream equipment you've been looking at. Yes, it's pretty, and yes, it's cool, but unless it helps you sell more beer or make more beer more efficiently and you can sell all of it, it's superfluous. So not everybody needs a copper-clad 15-barrel steam-fired 4-vessel brew house, especially not at this scale. Focus on your numbers first, and then let those numbers tell you what size equipment you should have. You can always upgrade later, but don't take on an unreasonable amount of debt right from the beginning where you won't be able to make that money back. And then, most of all, make friends with your local brewing community, the home brewers, the craft beer aficionados, and the pro brewers. We are a very tight-knit community. We support each other. We believe in our product and the people, and it's a great resource to use for trading products between people, trading yeast pitches for time on a keg washer, for example, leasing time on a bigger brew house, collaborating on a brew that gets you access to expensive hops that you wouldn't normally be able to afford. Use those connections. The next part of sizing is balancing production and profit. So as I said in the previous slide, you need to use your business plan as the tool that it is. It is not just for solidifying funding and convincing a bank to give you a loan. It is a tool to keep you focused and keep your business focused and plan for where you want to go and set goals to get there. The other trap that a lot of breweries get caught in, and especially in the past decade or so, is growing for the sake of growth. This is oftentimes driven by success at a competition or people talking about your brewery a lot and hyping it up online, and then you have people clamoring to get your beer. And the natural desire of a person who makes something that they put a lot of effort in and believe in a lot, when people start asking for it, you want to make more. You want to make it available to everybody. But the mantra here is don't grow for the sake of growing. You could contract with a distributor and push your beer out into new markets and get it to those people who are asking for it online, but what's the return on investment on that? You could start canning your latest crazy double dry hop New England style IPA, and I love the breweries that do, but make sure you're looking at net revenue from that package and make sure you are able to ensure quality, especially in dissolved oxygen in that package. That can, once beer starts leaving your premises, it's very difficult to ensure quality without investing a lot of money in people and systems to make that happen. And then your ROI on that product, your net revenue generated, starts going down real fast. You could expand your market and diversify revenue streams. You could make all sorts of different things, but is there demand enough in your local market? Do that Kodo plotting exercise where you look for those opportunity niches and capitalize on them when they're there, but don't try to force them. If there's somebody else who is supplying everybody in the area with their cold brew coffee, maybe that's not the best market for you to get into. So don't get distracted from what you are. You are a brewery and you make excellent craft beer, but look at what else your demographic might also want to spend money on and where there are opportunities to get those dollars. We here at Stout, we have cold brew coffee systems, we have kombucha systems. The Stout Brew Bomb is an excellent cold brew coffee system that restaurants have put in or brew pubs have put in that allows you to quickly and easily make cold brew coffee, which is an incredible margin item. I mean, you think seltzers make money, cold brew coffee makes it hand over fist. And then kombucha. If your brand is maybe associated with outdoorsy, health-conscious people, those are people that are also spending money on kombucha. So look at your audience, look at those opportunities to capitalize on other revenue streams, and see if it fits with your brand. And then efficiency is a big thing. Always be looking for ways to make your business operations, your brewing process, your use of raw materials more efficient. And we're talking both in terms of labor hours and raw materials here. So again, kind of shameless promotion for Stout here. Recirculating infusions on dry hop beers. There's a ton of research and white papers out there, which again, I'm happy to share with the group about how recirculating hops during dry hopping cuts down infusion time to hours instead of days. If you are moving all that beer quick enough, and you could move more if you were able to produce it 2 days faster, cutting your process time from 12 days down to 10, you can get an extra turn on that tank a month. That's extra money in your pocket. So Stout sells a 1 bar, 15 PSI rated hop back that would allow you to do that. Or automating your keg washing. If you're a keg driven business and you don't have serving tanks in your tasting room, the Stout Gladiator keg washer washes 40 kegs an hour, semi-automated, about 15-20 minutes of hands-on time per hour. So the rest of that hour, you can be doing other tasks in your brewery. Your brewery assistant can be doing other tasks and making the money you spend on their time in there spent more efficiently. Upgrading to a double batch size fermenter or a unitank so you can ferment and carbonate and then keg all out of the same vessel. Stout has anything from 1 barrel to 30 barrels and can fully customize anything you want. I'm almost done with the sales pitch, I promise. So serving tanks, again, that's another discussion. If you are able to put in serving tanks, if you have the space for it and the volume moves fast enough through there, you can eliminate all that labor time and cost of filling kegs, washing kegs, changing out kegs, and just put your top 3 movers in serving tanks. Just single wall bright tanks on wheels are awesome for this. Stout sells those up to 5 barrels. And then when it's empty, you just wheel it out of your walk-in, your refrigerated space, so that you don't have to CIP in there, because we all know that's a drag. And you can wash it out right next to your main brew house. Super easy. We also have jacketed bright tanks up to 30 barrels. So just some of the things Stout can offer to improve those efficiencies. So now we move to my friend Sam Holloway. Sam is an associate professor at Portland State University and works in the Pamplin School of Business, has been in the craft brew industry for, well, he'll probably text me later and tell me, but I think it's about 2 decades now, maybe a bit longer, and is an expert in all things craft beer, finance, and business. He runs the Crafting a Strategy website, with the logo of which is down in the bottom right-hand corner here. And that is just another resource that you can use as a brewer to share advice, to share tips and tricks. There are people in there that have worked at large-scale regional breweries that can share those kind of ideas, like Terminal Gravity and Widmer and Red Hook. There are people in there that have just started their brewery and have discovered something about their local market that they share. And so it is an incredible resource for exchanging ideas and information and most effectively planning the strategy for your business. Because at the end of the day, we always need to remember, and sometimes it takes a bit of mental refocusing, that craft brewing is a business. It has to make money in order to succeed and thrive. The beer is great, and that is what we are passionate about, but we need to focus on the business side as well. So I interviewed Sam for a Brew Your Own Magazine article I wrote, I write in their nano brewing column. And he gave these 3 points of advice for startup craft breweries. 1, be efficient. Again, try to serve your beer in the smallest amount of space possible and get the greatest yield of return per square foot, because you're paying per square foot with your lease. Each square foot needs to be generating revenue or associated in that revenue generation somehow. Stout also has stackable fermenters and bright tanks. Okay, that's it. Done. We need to find an innovative way to serve food without operating a restaurant, potentially. If you are small enough, you may not have the space or the capital to operate a restaurant. This is where food trucks have been a great partner for the craft beer industry. They can be a little bit flaky in some areas, but find a relationship with one that works for you and keep it, because it's in their best interest and your best interest. Food, as Sam wisely says here, is essential. Profitability in a business is getting that 1 more pint ordered per table, or 2 more pints per table, or getting them to stay there for another hour and meet up with friends and decide to stay for another hour. You are creating an ambiance and an environment to generate money. The beer is just the vessel that makes that happen. And number 3, don't be in a hurry to package and distribute your beers. This is what I say in terms of don't grow for the sake of growing. The economics of wholesale, as Sam says, vastly favor large-scale breweries, especially now that those large-scale operations have acquired so many large-scale regional craft operations. They are going to win at that game every time. So if you need to expand, and if you have the capital to do so and the potential revenue generation to meet that, then just build another tasting room. Next, from Sam, a pretty honest, blunt question: are small-scale breweries advisable at this point? Now, when I asked Sam this question, this was pre-corona. I think he would say that it still holds true. Small-scale is the way to go. Don't over-leverage yourself. Don't jump into a bigger system than you need to. Don't try to serve every market. You aren't selling beer so much or competing against every brewery in the area or trying to take down Budweiser. You're competing for drinking occasions. You're competing for those butts in your seats, and you are selling that experience that is associated with your beer but goes beyond the technical quality of your beer or the hype on your beer. You are selling an experience, especially in the small scale market where your interactions are face to face. Even if you're releasing cans, you are selling an experience with those. So if you think and act like a large brewery, you're setting yourself up for failure. It's a different playbook, and you can learn lessons from the big guys, but don't try to follow all their rules, because the rules are set to favor them exceptionally. And then another point here that often gets read over at the bottom: control the conversations with consumers. This is about your brand conversation, your brand conception in the mind of your consumer. The more that you can keep those consumers in your tasting room and having your beer and controlling what they're seeing and doing and talking about around them, not in kind of a Black Mirror sense, but in a brand generation and marketing sense, the better. The more you can focus that conversation on your brand and what it really means and what you stand for, the more loyal those consumers are going to be. And then I was asking Sam, of course he couldn't predict Corona, as intelligent as he is, that kind of eluded all of us. What do the next 3 to 5 years look like? And I think this still holds true despite what we've been through in the past 10 months here. Fragmentation, as I talked about earlier. That's the sectioning of the market. So initially that sectioning was between big beer and craft beer. And now craft beer itself is sectioning and fragmenting. So the top 100 to 150 breweries, and we're talking craft breweries now, whether they're acquired and owned separately or they're a large-scale regional production, they're going to continue to merge and acquire and play the game of eking out that extra 2 cents per package, playing the high volume, low margin scale game. They have the most volume, but as Sam wisely says, they are not the most prevalent example in the sample. If we're looking at number of operations, number of facilities and brick and mortar establishments, 95% of those are going to be small scale pubs, whether they have a food component or not. They're going to be the small scale drinking location, the local drinking opportunity that you walk to. So fragmentation, as I talked about earlier, in those small sections that we're seeing, that's where entrepreneurship has the most opportunity. And there are more neighborhoods, there are underserved markets where you can gain dollars that are being spent elsewhere right now, either on packaged product or regional breweries. This is where, as Sam says, a 3-barrel system in the right neighborhood can produce a profitable business. You just have to use analytical tools like that Kodo decision chart of plotting 2 extremes on the X and Y and look for those niche opportunities. They're there. You just have to find them. And we'll end on hopefully not too much of a downer. If you want to get big and wealthy, I'm talking millions in beer, as Sam says, you're about 25 years too late. Those opportunities are gone. Don't try to chase them. You can still build a very comfortable business and employ people and pay yourself and create a great brand that resonates with your audience, but you're not going to be big, and trying to compete there is a losing game. So craft beer, is it a trap? No, it is an opportunity. You just have to, these are some kind of hand-picked lessons from what I've been endlessly rambling on about here. Choose your scale intelligently and realistically. Make sure you are looking at data and looking at financials and use those to inform your decisions. Don't let emotion in there too much. Look at similar scale retail operations and similar brewery operations in your area that are succeeding and doing it consistently over time. Not the one that just opened 6 months ago and is killing it in their tasting room. Look at consistency and consumer trends in your area, wherever you're planning on serving or opening. Rather than trying to compete as a commodity in craft beer, be craft. Focus on that uniquely crafted value of your product. Find that opportunity niche in that data analysis and stick to it and reanalyze it over time according to your business plan. Make sure that you are following that plan and adjust the plan if necessary. And right size your brewery based on that plan, based on the financials of what you're willing to invest, what kind of debt you're willing to take on, and having a plan to get to net positive revenue. And always invest in efficiency of equipment, space, time, materials. Whatever you can do to do that, the more profitable your product becomes at the end of the day. Last time, I promise. So thank you, everyone. I was talking with Andrew previously about maybe walking around the space, but I don't know that we'll have time to do that. The new location here is huge and really cool to look at, but we're always open to brewers to come down. If you're in the area, please give us a call, stop by, and we're happy to show you around. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you got something out of it. And then I guess Andrew will come back on maybe. Yeah, so it looks like Sam was commenting here in the comments. It only comes across as Facebook user, but Sam is an excellent guy to chat with if you ever have questions. All right, so that's it, and thank you all for listening.